Episode 1 of Sweet Home begins in September 2020. Armed soldiers descend on a snow-covered abandoned apartment block as we see weird, twisted creatures snarling at the sky. From the wreckage of this building, a solitary human being shows. Blood-stained and staggering through the snow, a helicopter overhead tracks his every move as the soldiers on the bridge prepare to fire. Despite numerous blasts to the chest, he simply brushes these aside and continues walking. We then jump back a month to find the world a very different place. Lush greens consume the environment as crickets chirp in the distance. Our protagonist, Hyun Su, arrives in town. He's living alone and clearly shy, acting standoffish with the maintenance man outside cutting the lawn. Upstairs in his apartment, he sits in darkness as the curtains blow and police sirens wail outside. Contemplating whether he should just die or not, Hyun Su eventually heads up to the rooftop and looks over the edge. However, he's distracted by a girl across the apartment block from him called Lee Yoon-yu, dancing and practicing her ballet moves. That is, until she steps in chewing gum. After quizzing Hyun Su about what he's doing, she eventually tells him not to die, as it would cause a lot of problems for everyone else in the building. Downstairs, the security guard is berated by his superior over the bed he has set up in the office. He receives a package of food though, claiming the fish inside is for a resident. As he opens up the container, his nose immediately starts bloodying, and he clutches it with both hands. After patching it up, he greets Hyun Su, who returns to his apartment. However, not before he hands over a bottle of beer as an apology. Something is clearly up with this guy, and Hyun Su senses this, checking through the peephole to see what he's doing. Meanwhile, Jae-soo sits in her room smoking before eventually heading out to work. With a bass guitar on her back, she waits for the elevator as she runs into another resident, a rather crazy lady who wheels a pram with no baby inside. Jae-soo soon learns that this woman is suffering from grief as Yoon Jae-hoon introduces himself to her in the hallway. He's a Korean language teacher but also very religious too. We see several other residents here, including a shady-looking Hyun Sang-wook who smokes in his room while torturing someone on the floor. Wrapped up in tape, this man struggles to breathe as Sang-wook stubs his cigarette out in the man's mouth. Meanwhile, Hyun Su learns that he's been selected as a tester for an upcoming remake of a game. He's told to head over to G Tower on the 25th August in order to make this happen. As fate would have it, that's the date he's got listed as suicide in his calendar. That evening, Hyun Su heads out to pick up his parcel, but instead finds blood stained across the floor, a breadcrumb trail of ramen noodles and a woman pleading for help. Hyun Su cowers back to his room before eventually speaking to his neighbor at the door. She tells him that her cat is gone and pleads with him to open up. When he asks to see her arms, however, she completely flies off the handle and scurries away as blood oozes from her nose. As Hyun Su heads outside, he finds the girl gone. Instead, he passes out on the floor in front of Sang-wook, who's outside Jae-soo's door, and manages to somehow bend the metal too. Unsure what else to do, she grabs a baseball bat. With the security guard gone, the doors locked and a killer on the loose, the residents all gather in the main atrium to try to work out exactly what to do next. Eventually they manage to make it into the manager's office where firefighter Yi Kang rings the emergency services, but finds them all completely busy. With the phone lines dead and emergency lighting accidentally activated, they also accidentally open the main gates. That probably isn't the best move though, as they find a strange creature just outside the doorway. As its mouth opens wide and begins smashing through the glass with a twisting tentacle, flashbacks to Resident Evil's monsters can certainly be felt here as it goes on the rampage. Yoon Hyuk grabs a fire extinguisher though and takes charge, tasking them to close the shutters and keep the creature at bay. It's touch and go for a while as Jae Kang forces the creature back just in time before it gets them. As the residents gather together and regroup, they realize the outside world has been ravaged by these creatures that have taken over. As one of the creatures growls protein, the residents inside the apartment block realize that the world as they know it is turned upside down. Up in his room, Hyun Su starts bleeding profusely from his. We begin episode 2 of Sweet Home with a look at 19-year-old Hyun Su back at home, and with scars up his arm seemingly hinting at self-harming. He continues to play video games and ignores his mother's pleas to head out for a family trip. His behavior is clearly dividing the family, but as they argue in the car, his father begins bleeding profusely from the nose and passes out, subsequently crashing the car. As the only one of his family to survive, Hyun Su is given 30 million won, but berates the petty amount of money he's left behind. This catches us up to the present as Sang-wook is attacked on the stairwell by the maniacal girl from before. After biting a chunk out of his back, he beats the girl down before leaving it in a bloody mess. Meanwhile, Soo-young helps Ye-kyung move the dead body from the hallway and eventually sends a picture of him to his family. Down in the basement, however, Jae-soo finds the security guard laughing and calling out for Manager Han. As blood gushes down his face, she smacks the man instinctively before Yoon Hye-ok saves her from her ordeal. In the midst of all this carnage, the residents all receive an emergency message confirming what's happening outside. As they check the news, they realize that this disease is countrywide, and right now they're in damage control mode. The creature on the stairs stands back up again, twisting and contorting as it begins ascending the stairs toward the other residents. In the main atrium, the group gathers to try to work out what to do and contemplate whether they should all reconvene on the 7th floor or not. Fighting inevitably breaks out as everyone begins disagreeing over the best option forward. The arrival of Sang-wook soon changes the dynamic of the room. Given he's been bitten, the other residents cower away from him before he's eventually tasered and knocked out on the ground. 8 hours later, Hyun Su struggles to keep his nose from bleeding. He heads online and sees numerous people talking about this disease and how they're calling it a curse. No one seems to know where it originated from, and given the rate it's spreading, it seems unlikely they'll find a solution that won't result in many people dying. Unfortunately, the internet connection is severed and goes down before he can get a chance to research further. Hyun Su accidentally lets in the creature into his room, which looks more like an overgrown gremlin now. It seems to have heightened hearing and is missing half its head. It's a tense affair to say the least, as it stumbles around the room, while Hyun Su holds his nerve for long enough to see this creature eventually stumble away. With Sang-wook tied up and held behind shutters, Seung-won turns to So-hyeon for answers given he's their makeshift leader now. Armed with a knife and a gas mask, he heads in intending to stab Sang-wook, but hesitates. It's a big enough pause for Sang-wook to headbutt So-hyeon square across the face. Meanwhile, Jae-hun and Jae-soo find the beaten man in the elevator. The former obviously knows he's the captive of Sang-wook, but for now decides against saying anything. Armed with a hammer, he joins them on the hunt. Elsewhere, the rest of the group contemplate whether to leave and make a move on the daycare center or stay there for the time being. Although the director, Jin-uk, is against the idea, Yoon Hye-ok coolly shuts down her argument and eventually walks away. Up in one of the rooms, a resident hangs himself, which brings back bad memories for Jae-soo, who remembers seeing a face from her past doing the exact same thing. Whoever it was, they left a post-it note telling her that the guitar is hers. Hyun Su makes a bold decision to help out a resident in the apartment block below. A giant eyeball attached to a tentacle heads up the building and wraps up, squeezing him tightly. This happens to give his neighbor Do-sik enough time to sever the eyeball and save Hyun Su's life before it's too late. Together, they decide to team up and save the kids. Knowing that his phone can attract the monsters, he prepares to head out and meets Do-sik at his apartment. It turns out he's in a wheelchair and has a pretty nifty set of tools to use too. However, he warns Hyun Su about taking the monsters on face-to-face and encourages him to play more tactically. This plays out in the form of a bouncy ball, used as a distraction for the half-headed gremlin creature. Hyun Su manages to sneak up behind the creature and electrocute it with his makeshift spear. So-hyeon meanwhile makes his way into the convenience store, where Ye-kyung happens to be too. The food inside the store is literally all they have left, and both Ye-kyung and Yoon Hye-ok are well aware of that. In fact, both of them start to work out exactly how to ration the food and make it last, if they're going to be stuck in there for a while. So-hyeon, though, is not willing to share anything. Meanwhile, Hyun Su charges down the hallway and manages to make it to the two kids as they realize their father has passed away. Unfortunately, things take a turn for the worst when Hyun Su's condition worsens and he begins bleeding profusely from the nose again. Only this time, his eyes are blackened. Episode 3 of Sweet Home starts with a repeat of the family trip from before, but this time Hyun Su is in the car, telling his parents they should die. All of this is a bad dream, of course, and as the shadow version of himself stares back menacingly in a mirror, Hyun Su awakens with a start. However, he still has blackened eyes. This is only made worse by another monster showing up at the apartment, smashing the walls to bits and trying to get the kids. Jae-soo and Jae-hun overhear the commotion and rock up behind Hyun Su to try and take out the behemoth. Together, they drag Hyun Su to safety, but see his blackened eyes which suddenly fade. He asks them both for help as blood stains his mouth. Unfortunately, the blind gremlin monster from before returns, but the two kids manage to make it to safety before he gets them. Both monsters start attacking one another, and with them both distracted, the kids hurry up to room 1408. Unfortunately, they're not alone, though, as the giant beast chases after them, stalking ever closer. However, an unlikely source of help comes in the form of Myung-suk, who shows up with her empty pram. She quickly receives a swift punch to the face for her troubles. With Myung-suk on the ground, a sweet moment of acceptance washes over her as she sees her smiling baby on the floor next to her. As she smiles weakly, this monster smashes a fist down into her body. The group work together and manage to distract the monster long enough for them to make it to Do-6 apartment. A seemingly recovered Myung-suk makes it too, and also recovers from the same black-eyed infection Hyun Su had. Jae-hun manages to lead the large monster to the window, where it lunges at him and falls out to its doom. Presumably anyway. Sang-wook patches his shoulder up as he checks the news and sees a broadcast about the current monster pandemic. Bleeding from the mouth, the president tries to keep order, but when he stumbles over and begins incoherently rambling, gunshots end the broadcast. Of course, this just causes more panic. That panic materializes itself in So-hyeon locking himself inside the convenience store and refusing to let anyone else in. Well, the resident from room 802, the one beaten down by Sang-wook, shows up with a suitcase packed full of food. He shares it out to everyone, but blood staining the lining rings alarm bells for some of those he hands food to. In room 1408, the team have a brief respite and think over their time together, wondering exactly what they'll do next. Eventually, Hyun Su admits that he's infected and makes a pact with Jae-soo that if either of them turn, they'll kill the other. They all survive the night as Yoon Hye-ok gets on the tannoy in the morning and tells them to head up to the first floor where it's safe. Only Jin-uk sees her daughter running for the apartment block, which sends all the residents into a tailspin over what to do by the front doors. Soo-young rushes outside, but unfortunately a whipping tentacle protrudes forth and impales both him and Jin-uk's daughter, sucking the life force from them as they're left in a bloody heap and the with two people dead and the residents in disarray. Episode 4 of Sweet Home begins with a mourning Jin-uk blaming Yoon Hye-ok for what's happened. He's clearly shocked too and struggles to keep the residents under control. Meanwhile, Jae-soo and Jae-hun head out in the morning, armed with a makeshift shield made from a cupboard door to protect them. Just before they leave, Hyun Su decides to join them as the two kids thank him for saving them. The date is August 18th, and it's officially day 4 of confinement. The different residents all begin working together to bring makeshift boards and barricades for the doorways downstairs. Kang has a close encounter with a creature in the vents, one not dissimilar from the Licker and Resident Evil. She manages to free herself from its monstrous tentacle, but finds herself stuck and away from her phone as Sang-won rings. She does make it back to Yoon Hye-ok though, but berates him for knowing there was a monster lurking around. As she staggers away, air raid sirens wail as we hear more about what's happening around Korea. A news report confirms that the military will be in charge of all security and civil affairs from here on out. They're not quite sure how this infection has been spreading, but they do know some key details. These creatures have excellent regenerative capabilities, but the soldiers confirm there's a moment dubbed Golden Hour, where these creatures can be killed by incinerating them. Right now, this seems to be the only solution to stopping their threat. Survive. Good luck, the soldier retorts before the broadcast ends. Hyun Su continues to have bad dreams before awakening in Yoon Yu's room. Yoon Hyok's there too, and he warns Hyun Su that things are going to be tough from here on out. That roughness is made worse when he heads out to the main atrium where the rest of the residents happen to be. So-hyeon wants to get rid of Hyun Su, seeing him as a threat to their livelihood, but they all eventually decide to vote on his fate. It goes right down to the wire too until the final note confirms to be invalid. And just like that, So-hyeon gets infected and begins bleeding profusely from the nose. When he awakens, he finds himself in isolation with Hyun Su. Kang, however, finds herself suffering with an upset stomach. While she tries to make sense of what's been happening, Jae-soo comforts Jin-uk, who mourns the death of her daughter. Jae-soo heads into the bathroom and spies a baseball bat sitting against the wall. This brings back memories of the past as we see that the boy lending her a helping hand is also the owner of the guitar. Back in the present, Sang-wook goes on the hunt and finds the room 802 resident he was torturing from before. Sang-wook beats him down until the boy races away, convincing the others to keep him locked up for now. This sees him in the same room as Hyun Su and So-hyeon. He confronts Hyun Su and asks him how he can turn into a monster like him, as Hyun Su starts to exhibit concerns of his own. Up in the apartments, Do-sik opens the door to the bathroom but finds a massive sack that seems to be holding a child inside. With the gun in hand, he remains shocked over what he's seen and deliberates over his next move. Episode 5 of Sweet Home begins with Yoon Hyok calling for Hyun Su and taking him out of isolation. It turns out he's going to be doing all the dangerous work from now on, and that includes finding Do-sik and saving him from his predicament. As we cut back to Do-sik, he deliberates with the bathroom, a task made more difficult when he remembers Myung-suk's story about her daughter. Eventually he decides to shut the door and stay put for now. Yoon Hyok eventually backs up Sang-woon as he remains determined to head back into the main area of the apartment building. Opening the locked door, Hyun Su holds back while Sang-wook goes on ahead. Yoon Hyok's words weigh heavily on him, especially as he tells Hyun Su to rescue Do-sik and that the kids are secondary. It's pretty cold, but something that he collaborates with Yoon Yu over, telling her that Hyun Su may be their strongest weapon to use in this coming fight. It also turns out the vote from before were completely legit and not at all staged like he initially intended to do. As they talk, Yoon Seok mentions the crew blog he saw online, specifically a post about how this isn't really a disease, but actually a curse. Upstairs, Sang-wook and Hyun Su work together to navigate through the burning rooms as a lightning-quick monster with a pulsing orange heart arrives and begins chasing them. Thankfully, our two new characters are on hand and enter the fray, a crossbow-wielding girl called Yuri and her elderly patient. Sang-wook heads up to room 802 and begins sifting through Soon-jae's belongings. Using the keys he swiped last episode, Sang-wook sees numerous pictures of different kids beaten and pictures of them up on the wall, a disgusting twisted trophy cabinet. Now it becomes apparent exactly why this man was beaten as badly as he was. Hyun Su, Jae-soo and the old man make it to the apartment holding Do-sik. Inside, Hyun Suk sees the sack in the bathroom for himself and contemplates what to do next. Meanwhile, Sang-wook heads down to the basement but is blindsided by Soon-jae, who bashes him over the head with a hammer several times. Eventually Soon-jae gets his just desserts as Sang-wook beats this man down to a pulp. Dragging his lifeless body to the front, he lifts up the shutters, drops the hammer, and proceeds to drag Soon-jae outside. He closes the shutters, but Yoon Hyok is there, holding them back up to keep him in. In this courageous act, Sang-wook drags both Min-ju and Soo-young inside. There, the pair are given a proper burial as the residents join together and pay their respects. On the back of this, Kang decides to deal with her demons alone. As she heads out, the rest of the residents contemplate what it means to be human and whether this curse is just the next step in evolution. We begin episode 6 of Sweet Home with a look at Sang-wook's past, specifically the moments he was hired to take down Soon-jae. Although he initially refused, a picture of a young girl and an impassioned grief-stricken father were enough for him to change his mind. Back in the present, Sang-wook holds Yuri around the neck as he awakens with a start. He soon lets go, but it's clear the team are divided over whether he should be allowed to stay in the apartment block or not. Jin-uk is incredibly grateful though, handing over a necklace for him as thanks. Sang-wook's final act to rid himself of Soon-jae's memory is to bury his keys in the dirt next to the two graves. Given he was paid to find the girl, Sang-wook is racked with guilt so much so that he even asks Jae-hun to pray on his behalf. While most of the residents start building traps, Jae-kyung heads off alone. It's here we cut back to June 2020 to see her working and flirting with the chief physician Sang-won. This man happens to be her fiancé, and another flashback in July that same year sees Jae-kyung asking in vain to head back into a fire to find any victims. When she's refused that honor, she hands in her badge and resigns. Back in the present, Jae-kyung races off on her bike as Yoon Hye-ok and Jae-hun sit and talk. It turns out Jae-hun used to be an alcoholic, but he turned to religion which helped him through his dark times, and there are plenty of dark times ahead. For now though, the residents instigate 3 simple rules for survival, including moving in pairs and having their temperature checked every night at 8 p.m. While most of the residents are fine with rules, Do-sik isn't happy with the way Hyun Su is being used as a weapon. For now, Hyun Su is being used as an errand boy, heading into different rooms to collect up what the residents want. Meanwhile, So-hyeon begins to turn into a monster, with hair flowing all the way down to the floor. Like a grotesque cousinet, he shuffles forward before telling his wife to kill him. So-jeong certainly obliges and begins repeatedly slamming an iron pipe across his head. All those years of abuse, both mental and physical, all come gushing out in one swift motion of blood-soaked revenge. Jae-kyung makes it to Sang-won's office, where it's revealed that the Kru blog is actually his. He's been writing up a report on this curse, and as she reads the words he's written, she suddenly looks up to find soldiers standing over her. They snatch her up and take Jae-kyung away. Back at the apartment, Hyun Su continues to suffer from the demons inside his head. When he awakens, Yoon happens to be watching over him and notices the scars up his arms. She helps patch him up and eventually leaves him the plasters to finish the job himself. Yoon Hye-ok heads inside the room and talks to him about the monster situation. He wants them to try and find a way to survive, and right now they're not sure how long it takes to fully turn into a monster. Deducing what we heard earlier from the Kru post, it seems to be 15 days. Jae-kyung meanwhile is held up from the ceiling by these soldiers who question her over what she read. Instead, she tries to bargain with them and promises to show them someone resisting becoming a monster. As we soon see though, Hyun Su is losing the battle against this infection as he hangs upside down from the ceiling and turns himself into a strange oozing cocoon. The residents immediately knock him down, but that's the last of their problems. The lightning-quick glowing creature from before comes racing out the traps and begins going after the group down in the basement. Remember the liquor-like creature from several episodes ago? It's back. It chases one of the kids through the hallways before Do-sik shows up with his weapon, ready to fight. Episode 7 of Sweet Home wastes absolutely no time as we kick off right where we left off. 2 exciting action set pieces ensue, one featuring the group in the parking lot and another with Do-sik upstairs. Downstairs, the group bundle into a car and take off as numerous creatures surround them. Jae-hun and Jae-soo work together while Yoon Hye-ok drives. Gil-seop and his flamethrower are enough to thwart the threat though as the place ignites into a fiery tomb of screaming monsters. Upstairs, Yoon rallies the troops and tells them they need to work together and use traps to try and thwart the threat. While they do, Do-sik does his best to hold off the creature on top of him, which sees a sharp tentacle impale his leg for his troubles. With a flaming Molotov in hand, the group burn the creature long enough for Do-sik to crawl away to safety and Hyun Su to jump in and electrocute the creature with his spear. After saving their lives, the group are a bit more appreciative of Hyun Su, apologizing for locking him up initially. Meanwhile, Uri speaks to Sang-wook who eventually swallows his pride and allows her to tend to his wounds. He's in a really bad way too, especially when he lifts his shirt to show the crimson mess of blood and green tape. Afterward, the group all sit down to eat, but tellingly Hyun Su and Sang-wook take themselves away from the main rabble of residents. Gil-seop joins them though. He shows off the scar across his stomach and tries to find common ground with the duo. It seems to do the trick, as the pair sit cross-legged and eat. With the water tank contaminated, the group realize they've got some serious problems. Down in the basement, Yoon-hyuk and Do-sik examine the damage to their car and try to concoct a plan to venture outside and grab resources before it's too late. Unfortunately, panic and fear consume Seung-won as he begins maniacally screaming and despairing about their situation. Thankfully, Gil-seob manages to talk some sense into him, followed by a swift punch from Sang-wook too. While all this is going on, Jae-kyung is cut loose from her ordeal by the soldiers. She's told that those who survive the monster infection are known as special infectees. Back in the apartment complex, the group band together and put their plan into action. It's the proverbial calm before the storm though, as all our residents prepare to head outside. Jae-soo plays her guitar while Hyun Su listens. Jae-hun drinks soju, while Sang-wook apologizes to Seung-won for hitting him. Unfortunately, Jae-soo takes a turn for the worst not long after and collapses. It turns out she has appendicitis. She needs surgery, and with very little in the way of sterile equipment or a doctor on scene, things look bleak. Rai volunteers to help though as the group prepare for surgery. Outside the room, Yoon-hyuk warns Hyun Su that if things go sideways, then he's to head off and get the resources they need. The group is essentially now split into two, with most of the residents hanging back to try and save Jae-soo. As Hyun Su bundles in the reinforced car, he remembers key moments from his past, a childhood full of bullying and regret. Despite the bullying stopping when his father got involved, his old friend blamed him for his woes, which is why Hyun Su took a Stanley knife to his wrist. He was racked with guilt and believed he had nothing to live for. In the present, Hyun Su readies himself to face the outside world, but a giant creature slams into the side of the car and knocks it. Realizing their plan is a bust, episode 8 of Sweet Home begins with Hyun Su awakening to find the towering behemoth back and angrier than ever. Gil-seob does his best to help, throwing a Molotov at the creature until he begins bleeding from the nose. This creature towers over them both as Gil-seob looks set to meet a grisly end. Thankfully, he survives courtesy of Jae-kyung ramming it with a fire truck. That's not the end of it, though, as the creature tries to tip the truck over and crush her. Sang-wook does his best to free Uri from the car, while Jae-kyung serves as the distraction needed to save the others to scramble to safety. With the creature suffering serious burns, Jae-kyung rams it repeatedly with the fire engine and manages to save the day. Back inside, Jae-hun keeps watch, while Yoon-hyuk completes his surgery and leaves her fate up to Jae-soo herself. With the threat outside gone, the team head back in as Jae-kyung's fire truck supplies crucial fresh water for the group. Gil-seob berates Uri for heading out, although thanks to Jae-kyung she now has an inhaler. Jae-hun meanwhile slips back into old habits and continues to drink. Sang-wook knows all about demons, though and sits opposite him, convincing Jae-hun not to give up hope. When Hyun Su awakens, Jae-kyung confronts him and asks exactly when his first symptoms occurred. He tells her he just wanted to live. It's certainly ironic, given what he's been though and his desire to commit suicide in the past. Eventually, Jae-kyung admits she ran into soldiers and told them about Hyun Su too, hence the questions. After, she has a shower, where guilt threatens to consume her. The soldiers promise to let her go and reveal more about Sang-won exchange for bringing Hyun Su to them. After giving her a tracker to hone in on their location, they allowed her to leave, given Hyun Su may be the key to their survival. When So-jeong reveals that she's infected, the group unanimously vote to keep her inside. There's a sense of comradeship between these survivors now, but the residents do put her in isolation, just to be on the safe side. With So-jeong gone for now, the rest of the residents tell each other scary stories. Unfortunately, a runaway soldier shows up in the apartment block and begins convulsing and coughing up blood. Away from the drama though, Hyun Su talks openly to Yoon-yu, who admits she's given up ballet and teaches him how to do her hand gesture from before. This small act of kindness is enough for Hyun Su to begin cutting his hair. It's a symbolic gesture, one signifying him cutting away all the pain and grief he's felt over the years. Jae-soo awakens from surgery safe and sound, which is one positive to come from this situation. However, the group have bigger fish to fry. The soldier awakens, whom we learn is called Jo-seong. He's clearly in shock, and as his radio crackles into life, he begins growing more and more erratic. Realizing that their So's message may not be such a good idea, Sang-wook and Hyun Su head up and cut it loose. On their way back down, they see the security guard in the elevator heading down with a weapon in hand. Hyun Su charges down too and tries to stop him as flies swarm all around his face. Thankfully Jae-hun is there to stop him as the two square off. Unfortunately Jae-hun loses his arm in the ensuing skirmish. With the blade of his sword severed too, Jae-hun stumbles forward and grabs the security guard, stabbing him in the chest and holding him back from the others. Sacrificing himself, he grabs the guard and keeps it at bay in the lift, asking the others to throw the fire in. Eventually Yoon Hyeok does just that as Jae-hun dies in the with Jae-soo slowly recovering. Episode 9 of Sweet Home begins with her remembering Jae-hun's last words. He told her he liked her. As she sits against the wall, Jae-soo is overcome with grief as Yoon shows and drops off some chocolates to try and help her mood. In fact, given her past demons, it's obvious Jae-soo is taking this death the hardest. Out of all the residents, it's Yoon who manages to give her the encouragement needed to carry on, telling Jae-soo not to be miserable and handing over the severed blade. While Sang-wook symbolically empties a bottle of soju over Jae-hun's grave, Sun-young continues to count down the days left before she gets over the worst of the infection. 5 days. Realizing they have no hope in outright fighting against the monsters, Gil-seop proposes heading out and finding an underground bunker of some description. Unfortunately, the time to move comes and goes as Jae-kyung contemplates using her tracker. For now, she remains quiet as Gil-seop notices the truck racing up to the apartment block. The truck slams straight into the front doors, unloading a whole stack of men who kill the runaway soldier and begin hunting the rest of the residents. While they take Gil-seop away, he's kept the kids safe in the vents. Unfortunately, all the residents find themselves trapped in a makeshift prison down on the ground floor. A penciled outline is enough for them to stay in line, especially when Jae-yoon is shot as an example to what happens when those rules aren't followed. Their leader, Eung-seop, greets the others as we cut back in time and see what happened to this guy. He reveals fragments of the past, including a small church he found full of bodies. As he smiles evilly, he tells them all that humans are the real monsters. With everyone caught together, Jae-kyung and Sang-wook seem to be their only weapons to get out of this predicament. Yoon Hyeok is recruited to their cause as Eung-seop speaks to a captured Sun-young. He holds a gun up to her and shoots, seemingly killing her instantly. Both Jae-kyung and Sang-wook work together and manage to down 2 soldiers before snatching up their gun and axe. Eventually they make their move as all hell breaks loose. The residents work together and pick off the different soldiers, one by one. Hyun Su leads the charge in the main atrium, but when Eung-seop eventually holds Yoon Hyeok up at gunpoint, things come to a standstill. Only, Sun-young returns and stabs Hyun Su through the chest after downing another soldier. As Hyun Su drops to the ground, writhing in agony, the other residents watch in horror as a fire starts and engulfs Sun-young. With Hyun Su taken away in a lift, Jae-kyung manages to save and free the rest of the residents. Unaware of the commotion down below, Hyun Su awakens to find himself on the rooftop. He begins staggering off, but as he does, Eung-seop shoots him again. Mutiny grips the group of criminals as one of the soldiers steps up and grabs Eung-seop round the neck, knocking him over the edge. It turns out Eung-seop wasn't the real leader after all. He was simply the rabbit, whereas this guy is the proverbial wolf. Holding out a bloodied hand, he tries to strike a deal with Hyun Su, just as a military helicopter flies over with a leaflet regarding the infection. As the lift descends, Hyun Su prepares to meet the rest of the residents. Hyun Su shows up with the hooded figure from the elevator as episode 10 of Sweet Home begins. To their surprise, they meet a medley of weapons in their wake. Hyun Su tells them all to drop their weapons as he confirms the criminal is the same as him. With hostilities quelled for now, Hyun Su looks over the body of Sun-young and comments how he was the one to fire the killing bullet. Afterwards though, he sits with the leader who talks about his ordeal. He went to the authorities looking for a cure, but they conducted every experiment they could think of on him to try and remove the infection. After all that, they weren't able to come up with a solution. As we later find out, the military have one more trick up their sleeve, Operation Golden Hour. Although they haven't used it yet, if the military give up hope of ever finding salvation, they're able to shoot everyone on sight, human and monster alike. While they talk, Hyeong and Jin-uk contemplate what to do with the military leaflet, specifically whether to sell out Hyun Su to save their own skin. Only, Hyeong is pretty sure it's a trap and tries in vain to talk to Hyun Su about this. Getting nowhere, he instead turns to Kang, who shows him the tracker she's got and has been contemplating whether to use it or not. At the same time, Sang-wook grabs Uri and rushes her to the main atrium after collapsing on the floor. In doing so though, the hooded thug knocks him down and prepares to leave. With the girl on his back, he heads out into the wilderness as a barrage of bullets ring out all around. Uri and Sang-wook catch the brunt of it, but they're not alone. Byung-il takes a life-threatening shot, while Kang's attempts to pelt him with machine gun fire does little to stop the threat. Hyun Su is seen enough though and snaps, knocking him down. Only, he gets back up and starts a fire outside. Hyun Su lets the infection take over, suddenly sprouting a wing where his arm used to be. Orchestral music picks up and honestly, I half expected Final Fantasy VI's One-Winged Angel to start. Anyway, the two fight but Jin-uk winds up caught in the crossfire and sacrifices himself to try and save Hyun Su from his dark fate. It seems to work too, as the wings sink back and he returns to his human form. Sobbing uncontrollably, they collapse in one another's arms. It's a big moment, especially given Hyun Su's lack of a father figure in his later years, and in a way, Jin-uk has filled in that spot. Now that he's gone, something inside Hyun Su changes and he seems to forget his memories. It's the amnesia trope? Outside, Ji-soo and Sang-wook both say goodbye to one another as they fade from this world. Meanwhile, Gil-seop remembers a gift left by Jin-uk and brings it to So-jeong and Yeong-su. After this act of kindness, Uri heads back and finds Gil-seop has passed away in his sleep. As he's taken down to the makeshift grave site, they find an underground bunker as snow begins falling outside. That snow becomes a blizzard as the army surrounds the apartment complex and threatens to swarm on them. Only, now we've got more context to what's going on at the start of episode 1. All the survivors huddle around a fire and try to work out what to do next. They ask Hyun Su to stay, but he seems adamant to head outside. Down in the bunker, grenades are set off which sees the army open fire on their position. All the residents scramble into the basement and begin trying to find a way out. Only, Hyun Su doesn't follow them. Hyeong does his best to stop Hyun Su walking away from the group, but it's too late. Hyun Su is too far gone. As Yoon realizes time has run out, the gate is shut tight as Hyeong sacrifices himself for the cause, a last fleeting act of defiance to try and help his friend. As tears stream down his face, eventually mixed with blood as the building collapses, he opens Yoon's Walkman and sees a photo of his family patched back up again, a symbolic act to show that he and his half-sister are back on the same terms again. Underground, Bomb returns to the group and barks excitedly, leading the group to safety. They open the vents and head back out again, looking upon the changed, desolate world before them. With everyone joined together, they face an army of soldiers pointing guns at them. Kang steps up as their leader reveals she didn't press the button, and their deal isn't over yet. Without much of a choice, everyone is put on a truck presumably bound for the survival camp mentioned in the leaflet. Unfortunately, Kang doesn't go with them, but does tell them all to survive. As the episode closes out, a battered and bloodied Hyun Su recovers from his wounds enough for him to open his eyes. Staring back at him in the car is none other than Sang-wook, who happens to be driving the truck. But is it really Sang-wook or is there something else going on? Theory of final episode. The dreaded Netflix cliffhanger? This one ends things on quite the dramatic note too, as all our characters' fates are left hanging in the balance. For the most part, this finale does well to answer some questions, but leaves lots unresolved too. What is this infection? Is it really a curse? What happened to all the monsters at the end? For something that began with so many out in the streets, I guess we are to assume that the army has been killing them off one by one. With more deaths this time around, albeit mostly to supporting characters, there's a distinct feel to this being a final fight, and the episode is all the stronger for it. Seeing Yoon Hyuk and Yoon Yu back on the same page again is nice, but again it's another example of why these episodes could have done with being a bit longer. The show is in desperate need of these characters gaining a sense of comradeship and spending more time together than they actually do. Still, director Lee Eung-bok, also responsible for Mr. Sunshine, does a great job bringing this webtoon to life. I hope this one is renewed for a second season. Whether it will or not, given the extended cast on board with this, remains to be seen. For now, Sweet Home finishes on a high despite its cliffhanger. Over the past few years, there's been a whole wave of new Korean dramas stepping away from the conventional tropes and ideas associated with this genre. While these shows may not achieve the same national ratings something like Penthouse, Sky Castle or World of the Married would, they're undoubtedly unique and stand out from the crowd. With a growing international audience hungry for more Asian content, Sweet Home is the latest Netflix foray into the world of horror. Adapted from the webtoon of the same name, Sweet Home is an action-packed fight for survival as humanity finds itself on the brink of extinction. When people suddenly begin to turn into monsters outside, a group of misfit residents inside an apartment complex are forced to work together. Of course, cabin fever, fear and paranoia begin to consume our characters. This is only made worse when a few begin to fall prey to that very same infection they're trying to keep out. When the monsters do show up, Sweet Home ramps up the pace and tension to deliver 4 breathless episodes of action back to back. It's not until the halfway point of the show where we actually stop and learn more about the characters we've been following. This serves as a proverbial deep breath, building toward a climactic finale that leaves the door wide open for a second season. At the heart of this conflict are several key players alongside a medley of supporting characters that hang on for the wild, blood-soaked ride. Reclusive and suicidal Hyun Su is the main focus here, but he's joined by the shadowy Sang-wook, musician Jae-soo, firefighter Jae-kyung and religious Korean language teacher, Jae-hun. There's a lot more characters here, though, and unfortunately this large ensemble is one of the big faults with the show. Given how many characters wrestle for screen time, Sweet Home has little time to distribute out equal amounts of characterization and growth, forced into slamming on the brakes midway through to flesh out the characters more. In a way, this does allow you to catch your breath after the relentless action, but it also feels like something that should have come a lot earlier to understand who all these characters are and what they're fighting to hold on to. In fact, this slightly rushed pacing is one of the biggest gripes I have with the show. Something Kingdom or Love Alarm can get away with the shorter run times, especially given the small cast of characters to work with. The cast here, though, is almost as big as one of the larger Korean drama projects, and given those are usually 75 minutes a pop, that shrunken time frame is certainly felt. What Sweet Home lacks in deep characters, it more than makes up for with explicit violence and gore. This is not a show for the squeamish either, with blood literally gushing from orifices and sprayed across faces and walls. Some of these moments are even accompanied by an extreme close-up shot too. If you can go in prepared for some pretty gnarling violence, then you should be absolutely fine with this one. Sweet Home may not be the next hit like Kingdom was, but it is a unique slice of the monster horror pie that's well worth tucking into. The 10 episodes progress along nicely, and if you can be prepared for a cliffhanger ending, then Sweet Home delivers a promising and satisfying horror romp. It's certainly not without its problems, but this is another great horror IP that hopefully will sprout some bloodied tendrils and hold on for a second season.